Hey, this is Jumpin' Jim Brunzel. When you have an opportunity, you got to listen to Count It Out with Mike and Tyler.
This episode of Count It Out with Mike and Tyler is provided by Cottage Spring.
You are listening to Count It Out with Mike and Tyler.
Well, we are live, pals, and welcome to another amazing edition of the Bill Apter Seal of Approved and provided by Cottage Springs. Count It Out with Mike and Tyler. My name is Tyler. I am joined, as always, by the one and only Mojito Mike. Mike, tell the people what is on board the show today.
We have thrown the list in the garbage today because there's no way any list could outdo what we're doing today. We have an absolute legend on the show. If you are a new wrestling fan, please sit down, listen, sit under the learning tree. You're about to learn some stuff. If you're an old school wrestling fan, you're about to listen to this and have a huge smile on your face. We have the AWA's own Greg Gagne on the show today. And let me tell you, man, this man has stories. This is going to be a great show.
Yeah, I am really excited for you guys to hear this interview. Mr. Gagne is a legend of the business. His family is pioneers of the industry, and you're going to hear a whole bunch of amazing stories. But before we get to that, we have to get to the Cottage Springs Punch-Out of the Week. And now, the Cottage Springs Punch-Out of the Week. Find your favorite flavors at cottagesprings.ca. Our guest today is a member of one of the most influential families in the history of professional wrestling. He is a former two-time AWA International TV Champion, a two-time AWA Tag Team Champion as part of one of my favorite tag teams, the High Flyers with Jumpin' Jim Brunzel. Of course, I am talking about the one and only Mr. Greg Gagne. Mr. Gagne, sir, this is such an honor. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Well, guys, thank you for having me today. Looking forward to it. I understand you guys have a great program here, so don't make the questions too tough, though.
Well, someone's been lying to you, sir, but we appreciate it anyways. So there is like so much stuff that I want to talk to you about, but I want to talk about some projects that you're currently involved in with right now. And that's the amazing action figure line that you're doing, Power Towns, where the wrestling lives on. So I need to know, where did this idea come from? This is such an incredible idea because you have all these amazing legends that you don't see a lot of figures getting made of.
Well, we had 255 of them on board.
Holy.
I got a call 2.5, almost 3 years ago now, from Steve Rosenthal. Steve was the gentleman that did our Remco toys back in the day. The first one to do actually wrestling figures. There's a long story to that. He first went to Vince McMahon because he lived up in New York and his son was a wrestling fan. And Vince talked to him about it. And he said, well, I need the contract changed. So Steve went home and changed the contract, came back. I don't like it. I need to change this, this, and this. So Steve went back and came back a third time, and Vince says, well, I need some upfront money. And he says, well, I can let me go talk to the company and I'll get back to you. So he came back, he had some money, and Vince threw a magazine at him. He said, you know these people? He said, yeah, they're my competitors. Well, I signed a deal with them. So he went online or talked to friends, and everybody told him about the AWA. At that time, we were the largest territory in the country, covered from, across Canada, from Winnipeg down to St. Louis to the West Coast. So we had a huge, huge territory. He came and did the Remco dolls, wrestling dolls, or action figures. For 8 years, he sold them, and then he retired. It did that well for him. It was the number one selling item they had until Steve brought on, I think it was either the Ninja Turtles or the Karate Kid. So Steve called me up. He said, "Hey, you want to get back in the toy business?" And I said, "Yeah." We started talking. I said, "Well, you know what? We should represent the people who've never had the action figures. And let's go back and let's tell the story of professional wrestling, how it started on the network TV back in 1950, which was the Dumont network out of Chicago. And it ran from 50 to 57. And there was guys like Vern, Lou Thez, Yukon Eric, Killer Kowalski, Hardboiled Haggerty, Tiny Mills, and it was just Wilbur Steiner, Dick the Bruiser. It was just, those are the guys, Don Leo Jonathan, that built the industry on TV. And so Vern knew the power of TV because he'd come out of college in 1949 and was signed by the Chicago Bears. And he had been to the Olympics in 48, and he really wanted to be a professional wrestler. And he had Hallis kind of released him just before their first game with Green Bay. So Green Bay picked Vern up. And he went up there and they said, well, he got up there to play. And they said, well, we can't play you because Hallis won't sign the release now. So Vern said, screw this, I'll go to wrestling. So he hit the networks at the end of 1940, early 1950. And he became their biggest star on the network TV. And his football contract was for $5,000. And he was the first athlete besides Babe Ruth to make over $100,000 in 1950.
Wow.
So he knew the power of wrestling. 1960, he bought into the Minneapolis wrestling, and his job was to expand the markets, the TV markets. And he expanded, from the Midwest all the way to the West Coast. And we had the largest, what they called back then, the territory. And we had the best talent in all the world. I mean, we had opening matches that were main event guys in other territories, but we only had like 16 to maybe 20 tops in the territory at a time, and they all made big money.
Oh, absolutely.
So that's kind of how it came about. And we started then. I contacted the people that are still alive, which weren't a whole lot, back in the 50s. I had to find the families. And we have 255 wrestlers on contracts from 1950 up until, the 1990s. We just had our first action figure from TNA come out. I don't know if you've seen those yet.
I was actually just about to ask about that.
And
They look great.
Yeah, you got Eddie Edwards, Moose, Jordan Grace, and of course our hometown boy, Josh Alexander, a nice Toronto boy there. How did the working relationship with TNA come to be? Because this is an incredible partnership.
Well, actually, Terry Allen, Magnum TA, I brought him on as one of our partners because I needed somebody else from wrestling in there. We had collectors and we had Steve, and I needed somebody from wrestling that could help me with all the talent. And TA is a phenomenal businessman, and he's been putting together a lot of other opportunities along with myself for our talent, for other merchandise. But he made the contact with TNA, and they've never had an action figure, and they're growing and they're on TV. Actually, we've done the TNA action figures are going like crazy. And who do you think's number one?
I'm hoping it's our friend Josh Alexander.
Mike?
My guess is Moose. My guess is Moose.
It's actually Jordan.
Wow, she's incredible.
That shouldn't surprise me at all.
She's outselling 4-1.
Holy moly!
That really shouldn't surprise me.
Well,
but the other ones are
fire.
catching up. But it's we have three lines now. We have our Ultra line, which our first line was Vern and Lou Thez, we took from the 50s. King Kong Brody, Stan Hansen, the 60s, 70s, and then Magnum TA and Kerry Von Erich. And those were phenomenal. And I don't know if there's any left or not. If somebody wanted one, they'd have to go to what is it? Classic Wrestling.
I believe
I should have got that one straight.
I can tell you one
Anyhow,
second.
I'll figure it out.
I heard you mention a name, and Mike, I'm going to throw it to you for the next question here. But you mentioned a name, and it triggered what I want to talk about with you as well, and that's Magnum TA.
Yes.
Over on the Four Horsemen Network right now on YouTube. There, you guys are doing a podcast called Straight Talk with the Boss. How much fun is it for you to sit down with one of your good friends, Magnum, another legend in the business, and just relive some of the glory days and some of the old stories and talk about the new product?
We got so many, they usually have to cut us off. we go a little long, but he's a great partner and phenomenal talent, and unfortunately his career was cut short. And I thought this was an opportunity for him to get back into the business, which he loves. And the two of us have a pretty good feel for what we think should be out there and should go strong.
It is highly entertaining stuff. I love listening to you guys, and Magnum's a bucket list guest for us too. So Magnum, if you're listening, come on over and talk to the boys from Toronto.
I might be able to give you a little. He's so busy because him and Steve are working on all the other merchandise that we're trying to get out, and they've come up with some stuff that's going to be never before seen by anybody.
I love that.
Yeah, it's going to be good.
Well,
I can't see anymore. I was sworn to secrecy. Sometimes I spill the juice and they all get a little hot at me.
Well, at least we did have Nikita on the show, and Nikita told some really great Magnum stories. So we'll have to make do with that for now.
We got Nikita on board too. His figure will be coming out.
Awesome.
Amazing. That's fantastic. Greg, I know you've talked about this ad nauseum in your life on every other show that you've ever and documentary you've ever been on, but for our audience, I need to ask you, you were part of an incredible training camp ran by your dad, included legends like Jim Brunzell, the Iron Sheik, Ken Patera, and of course, Ric Flair. Can you bring us back to what it was like in that barn?
Oh, God. You got to come out, see it. Well, first of all, Vern trained over 144 wrestlers, professional wrestlers, over his career, and only 2% didn't make it to the main event. Our group, as you said, was Ric Flair, Jim Brunzell. I talked Jim into coming. Ken Patera, Vern had sponsored him for the 72 Olympics, and then Ken wanted to turn wrestler. Mm-hmm. Ken came in at 360 pounds. Flair came in at, what was he, 292?
He was a big boy at that time, yeah.
Yeah, and then the Iron Sheik, who a friend of my dad's, Alan Rice, who was sponsoring with Vern, the Olympic team, had this Khosrow Vaziri, the Iron Sheik. My mom, in fact, gave him that name, the Iron Sheik. And it was a little new he had a little tougher time than the rest of us. But Vern always called that the most successful group he's ever trained. I mean, in 3 years, we were all wrestling main events, which usually takes 5 to 10 years. So it was grueling. It was the hardest thing we ever did. Jim and I came out of college football, Patera out of the Olympics, Khosrow out of the Olympics. Bob Bruggers, he came out of pro football. He was about 31 when he started, so it was a little tougher on him. And just when he hit his peak, or was going to hit his peak, he got in that plane accident with Flair was in, and it ended his career. So, but we had to build up the first hour. We did 6 hours a day, 6 days a week. The old barn was 2 stories. Second story was where the hayloft was, and they cleared that out and had the ring, and we had one light bulb over the ring. All the windows were out, the doors were off of it. Down below was the corral where the horses were in. So there was a lot of horse manure down there and mud usually. And we had convinced Flair to graduate. You had to dive out of the window and do a backdrop onto the horse crap. So about halfway through the camp, we lived in a Patera, Bob Bruggers, I lived in a duplex, and Flair and his wife Leslie were next door. So we get to the camp one day, and Vern says, "Where's Flair?" And I said, "We quit." He said, "What do you mean he quit?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. He quit." So Billy Robinson run the camp. I'm going to go get Flair. So he knocks on the door, and Leslie's there. He says, "Hey, where's Rick?" Well, he quit because Rick was scared to death that he's going to have to dive out of this window, do this big backdrop, right? We didn't dare tell Vern why he quit. He would have killed us. We were all kidding him, you know. So he said, "Vern," I said, "I can't do this. I just can't do this." And Vern talked to him a little bit, and he said, "No, I'm going to quit." And Vern open-handed him, knocked him on his ass. He said, "Get in my car. You're going to the camp." So Rick came back out. And we were all, you know, we didn't say shit. So Rick did that one more time, and Vern did the same thing and brought him back, but he made it through. But we did the 6 hours. The first hour was squats, free squats. We started with like 4 sets of 25. We had to build up to do 1,000 nonstop. And that took about 37 minutes to do those when we finally built up to it. So we had that other calisthenics that we did in that hour after, you know, till we got the 1,000 in. And the second hour, then we got in the ring and we learned how to hit the ropes. And when you first start, it kind of tears you from about here down to your hip. Skin just comes off you and you get black and blue and cut up. And that takes about 6 weeks. And Vernon told us it's going to take 6 weeks to harden your bodies up where you won't get black and blue, you won't get cut up. And that's about what it was. But we'd hit those ropes for an hour. And then we did holds and counter holds. We did lockups and headlocks, takeovers, you know, arm drags. And then the next hour was all bumps, learning how to protect yourself from a body slam or a arm drag or whatever. And we would probably do 200-300 each a day.
Oh,
Yeah, it was brutal, but it hardened your body up. You know, when you first start, you know, you have to try to control it. So if somebody picks up in a body slam, you have to try to get your hand into his waist and arch your back so he can't control you. So when he throws you, you're actually controlling the bump and coming down. But, you know, when you first start, guys get slammed on their shoulders, you know, their necks, and it's not fun.
well, I'm sure that Minnesota weather there, the ring was probably pretty stiff in that cold
Well,
weather
it was
too.
pretty stiff out there. We started the end of September. We went until the end of March.
Jeez.
So, you know, October, November, December, January in the barn, you know, it was shit. We'd get days where it was 20 below in there. And there's no freaking windows. The wind's blowing.
I gotta say, I am very happy that your dad was able to convince Rick to come back, because the Nature Boy Iron Sheik just doesn't seem to have the same ring to it that the Nature Boy Ric Flair might have to it.
Not quite. Well, we knew Rick in college, both Jim and I. He was supposed to play football with us, but he was a non-predictor. He didn't have the grades. And I remember one deal, this Murray Warmath, our coach, he was from Tennessee, a great football coach. And he calls me up. He says, "Where's Flair?" And I said, "Well, I'm not in charge of Flair." And he said, "Oh, yes, you are. You find him for me." Well, we had gone through fall football practice and started the season. In the second game, we're playing Michigan away. Well, Flair went up to Michigan to the game, and he met some gal up there. And when he came back, he was calling her, and he had run up $1,700 in long distance phone calls that came to the athletic department. So he got his butt chewed out on that. But what you see of Ric Flair today is what he was back then. First day of school, we come in, or, you know, we've been doing football. He wasn't practicing at all, but he had to hang around. And the sororities and the fraternities were, you know, doing their recruiting. And Flair was in what he called the Delta House, where some of the athletes were, and then we were in another one that the other athletes were in. So as the story goes, and they have little party at the beginning of the fall. The sorority comes over. One sorority comes over to that fraternity that they're hooked to, and they come in and flares in the Delta House, and the girls are coming up the sidewalk. They got all the young freshmen, and then you got the juniors and the seniors and the sophomores, and it's dark, and there's this window open up in the house, and there's a light bulb over it, and it's on. The light's on, and all of a sudden the girls hear woo, woo, and they look up, and here's Flair standing in the window, stark ass naked. Who wants to take a ride on Space Mountain?
Oh, God.
Well, the poor freshmen, they took off running. Some of the sophomores, and then the veterans, they came in, and I'm pretty sure that a couple of them took a ride on that Space Mountain that night. At least according to Rick.
I want to go back to the barn for 1 second,
Yeah.
just to ask you, being Vern's son, did you find that was Vern harder on you than he was on the others, being his son?
He was pretty.
Yeah.
He treated us all pretty much the same.
Okay.
He was hard on all of us.
Yeah.
He didn't show any favoritism, and no, he was hard. But I had, with me, when I told him I wanted,
did you feel he had higher standards for you being?
when I told him I wanted to wrestle, he said, "What makes you think you can wrestle?"
Yeah.
And I said, "Well, I've been wrestling you since I was a little kid down in the living room, all the time. In fact, when I went to the University of Wyoming to play football, we had the fall had ended in the spring, and then you have to do the winter training, and we were off at Christmas, so I came home, and I'm 20 years old at the time, and he says, 'Come on, we're going downstairs.' Moves all the furniture. I said, 'Oh shit, we have to do this.' And we get down and we're wrestling, and he's got me. He's holding me down, and I'm getting really pissed off. And I give him a little elbow in the nose. And when I did, he cracked my rib. Oof. So now I got to go back to Wyoming, and I'm a quarterback, and I start throwing, and I'm just aching. And coach says, "Well, what's wrong with you?" And I said, "Well, I got home, and we got this little ritual." And we got down and we were wrestling, and I kind of caught my dad with an elbow, and he cracked my ribs. And of course, they were all laughing about it. They thought it was funnier than hell. So I had to go through the spring, the football through the spring with the cracked ribs. So anyhow, I came home after graduating. I had an opportunity to sign as a free agent with a couple of football teams, and I said, I know you got this camp coming up. I'd really like to wrestle. And again, what makes you think you can wrestle? And I said, "Well, I've been wrestling with you since I'm a little kid. Give me a shot." So that's why I got in there with the rest of them. And I called Brunzell. I had played football with him. I said, "Jim, why don't you try out for wrestling?" He was playing semi-pro football, making nothing. "Well, I don't know how to wrestle." I said, "Well, come and learn." So he came, and the rest was history. But boy, I'll tell you what, there was nothing like that camp. There was, at that time, there was probably, I think there was 5 or 6 guys that really trained all the talent. You had Stu Hart up in Canada. Yes. You had Vern. You had Joe Blanchard and Fritz von Erich, Eddie Graham, who was phenomenal. And who am I missing? One more. Shoot. Anyhow, those were the guys that produced all the talent.
You mentioned the name Stu Hart there, and we're a couple guys from Toronto. We love us, the Hart family here in Canada. Did you?
Well, you do.
Yeah, he's they've been known to be pretty over in this neck of the woods. Did you or your dad have a lot of interaction with Stu at all? Because I
didn't, but my dad did.
Yeah, what was your dad's thoughts on Stu? Did he ever tell you any good Stu Hart stories?
Oh,
those are
God,
two of the toughest guys going, right?
Stu was a dandy. One story I remember, the newspaper guy came over to interview Stu about wrestling. And Stu had cats in the house. And they're at the kitchen table, and the guy's asking Stu questions, and the cat's down there, and Stu keeps looking over at the cat. And you kind of going, "Jesus, what?" And the guy's interviewing him. And all of a sudden he picks the cat up by the back of the neck, pulls him up, lifts his tail up, smells his ass, and he said, "He's okay." Well, that almost ended the interview.
I tell you, there's a lot of dream matches that people talk about in this world, but I think Vern Gagne versus Stu Hart inside that Hart dungeon or inside the Gagne barn, I don't think there's enough money in the world that people would pay to see that. That's phenomenal right there.
Yeah. Well, there was, we got to a point, it was, in January, it's like 15, 20 below. And we'd have sweatsuits on, the old cloth sweatsuits. And they had a drill. They put one guy in the middle of the ring and say I started in the ring. The other 5 were on the outside, and then one would get in. Maybe I'd start with Jim. And Vern would call, lock up, take a headlock, shoot him in the ropes, 2 tackles, leapfrog, reverse monkey flip, 2 arm drags. And you'd go nonstop for probably anywhere from 3 to 5 minutes with that guy. Then Jim would get out and the next guy would come in and you would repeat with the next guy. So by the time you were in the middle for, up to 20, 25 minutes and you're sweating your butt off. And then you have to get to the end of the line. And by the time you get to the front of the line, that sweatsuit is froze to your legs. And then he would call a body slam right away when you go in, and you felt like that cartoon character. You figure everything broke. God, we dreaded that. But and that went on through the whole month of January and most of February. That's the way they did it.
Jeez.
And then the last hour, they would take us, and we'd have to do sprints, run 10 yards, walk 10 yards down to this lake, Lake Riley, which was by the farm. And in fact, Prince lived right down there. Oh. He was a big wrestling fan. Him and his dad were down there. The house was the Purple House was right there. And we'd run down to that, and then we'd have to do the sprints back, run 10, walk 10. We'd get there, and he'd take us across the road where he had some other property, and that was clay cliffs on the Minnesota River. And we had to run up and down those cliffs, and we're there in January and February, and it's dark, and we're running these things. And Jim and I would usually come in first, then Cosrow, then Bob Bruggers, and then here'd come Ken and Rick, barely moving. They'd be about 5 to 8 minutes behind us usually, and sucking boy, but he'd get on their ass about picking it up. So when we came out of there, we were pretty well ready to go. And one of the first matches I had was with Rick, and we wrestled in Peoria, Illinois. And it's a opening match, 20-minute draw. 2 minutes into the match, I catch Rick in a body slam, and the ring collapses right in the middle. So he went down, and I dove down on him and covered him, and poor referee was leaning over, hanging there. 1-2, Rick kicked out. And we wrestled a 20-minute match with that ring broke like that. Oof. And this is our first year. I mean, we've only been wrestling a couple months. And when we got in the locker room, everybody in the locker room, Bachwinkle, Stevens, whoever was in there, came and grabbed us and said, "That was phenomenal. You guys, we don't think we could have done that." So I guess, right from the start, we were kind of, naturals. Not to brag or anything about it, but, we caught on quick, and we didn't let that phase us, where most guys would have just stopped wrestling. We finished the whole match. We'd get down there, our feet would be up here, our head down below, and the guy would dive on us. And so most time you'd end up rolling off down, and the poor referee was trying to drive down, and he'd end up down there in the bottom. It was quite an experience, but it was all part of growing into the business.
Yeah, you don't have to brag, because time tells, history, everything tells that, especially yourself, Rick, you were naturals. Some people are just born with it. Some people are meant for this business, and you guys 100% fit that bill. Speaking of Rick, Speaking of Rick, since he was one of your first matches, what were your thoughts a couple years ago when he really wanted to have that last match under the Jim Crockett bill? Did you watch that match, and what did you think of Rick doing that at his point?
You mean at the 70 year and 70? What was he? 73 then? 2 years ago?
Like that, yeah.
Yeah. I thought he was out of his mind. I didn't get to see the match, but I thought he was completely out of his mind. But you never really lose the feeling, and you always think you can still go in there and do it. And watching some of the young guys now, and you watch the WWE and AEW and TNA and Impact and the AEW, I just cringe sometimes. That to us, you have to be able to tell a story in the ring. And they've lost that. And it goes back to TV. You know what the attention span of the American public is now?
That'll be short.
Give me a number.
15 seconds.
How long?
About 15 seconds.
You're close. 8 seconds before they turn the channel.
Wow.
Yeah.
So they've had to adapt to that. And they just, they speed everything up.
Yeah.
And when you watch their pay-per-views, and since Triple H has taken over, you see more wrestling, I think, and more storytelling in there.
Yes.
Much different. Vince was always, it was just, I don't feel like he had the respect of wrestling. To him, it was a show, and it was a moneymaker for him. But he got in the ring and he performed unbelievable. I saw him a couple times.
Sure.
But his philosophy wasn't what we all grew up in. And Triple H comes from that older school. In fact, when I was down at WCW, he was one of my students. He was only there for 2 weeks when I was there, but then he went over to New York. I had Steve Austin, Triple H, Booker T and his brother, Diamond Dallas Page, and Kevin Nash.
Wow. That's a big lineup on his own.
That's who they had me working with.
Well, and you mentioned, the Triple H era right now, and you just named a bunch of names that you trained. And another name that we're seeing in this current era is Tiffany Stratton. I know that you had a hand in helping her break into the business. What was
hand?
I think your fingerprints are all over Tiffany there.
Not quite, but I had her, and Ken Anderson has a camp in St. Paul. And a friend of mine knew her parents. His name was John Jefferson. And he called me and he said, "Hey, will you do me a favor? This girl wants to wrestle. Will you train her?" We said, "Oh God, I don't want to train it. No, I don't want to train a girl. Please do it for me." So he convinced me. She had a great background. She was a gymnastics champion. When she got tired of doing gymnastics, she won everything. She went into weightlifting. Her first year, she set a world record for press over her head at her weight class. And then she quit that. She went into bodybuilding and she won that thing. So she was a good athlete. So I had her as Tyler Rampage Savage, he calls himself, and Justin Xavier, JDX, he calls himself. JDX had been wrestling a little bit, but he needed work, Tyler was young, 20 years old, and then Tiffany, or Jessica was her name at that time. And I trained them the same way Vern trained us. Went through that. They were a little more, I didn't do as many calisthenics because we only had it for about 2 or 3 hours in the ring. But we did all the bumps and everything, and she caught on like that. And then, and I would work the kids hard. The three of them, I'd work them really hard. She'd work with those guys and they'd trade off and they'd learn the holds. And she came in one day and she lays on the apron. And I said, what's the matter? Oh, I'm too tired today. I'm just going to watch. I said, no, you're not going to watch. You're done. Pack up and go home. I'm done with you. You can't do that. I said, what do you mean I can't do that? I'm not being paid to train you. And if you're not going to do what I'm telling you to do, there's no reason to be in here and me wasting my time with you. Get out. So she left for about 10 minutes and came back. And I said, are you ready to go to work? Yeah. So then I really pushed her hard. And then a few weeks later, she pulled the same stunt. I said, oh, that's it, done, out, go. And Ken Anderson was there. He said, I can't believe the attitude on her. And she was talking back to me. And I said, hey, you can talk back. You can say whatever you want. I'm done training you. You're on your own. Good luck. Now get out of here. And then Ken said, let me talk to her. So about 10 minutes later, she came back and he took her outside and talked to her. And from that time on, I never had another problem with her. But that attitude you see in the ring, somebody said, oh God, what is that great? Whoever came up with that? I said, nobody came up with it. That's her. That's really her.
That's a shoot.
But she has really progressed. And if you know, she's only been in there 2 years.
Yeah.
And like I say, when you came out of Vern's camp, usually it took people 5 to 10 years to get a main event level. And our group was at it at 3.
Mm-hmm.
She's been up there for 2, I think, a year and a half or 2 years with NXT. So about 3.5 years. So his system works.
Yeah, well, she's about ready to challenge for the world title.
And it's a respect for the sport, and it's working hard and listening. And if you can do that, and you're a good athlete, you could catch on.
Yeah.
A lot of people come in and think they know it all, and they don't go very far.
Speaking of good athletes, we had your partner, Jim Brunzell, on the show about a year ago or so. And he told us his version of the very crazy Mad Dog Vachon plane story. We were hoping we could get your version.
He wasn't on the flight. I don't think he was on the flight.
Is that not what he told us, Tyler?
He told us that he may or may not have been involved in supplying Mad Dog with some medicine to help get him to the level. I don't know if he said he was on the flight or not. But.
So we're flying. Jim was flying on. He didn't like flying the small plane. It took in that plane we could have 6, 7 wrestlers. One was a co-pilot. Our pilots were from Northwest Airlines. We had 2 different great pilots. And they taught Ray Stevens and Nick Bockwinkel how to land the plane in case there was an emergency. So we're flying down to Omaha, and Jim wasn't on the plane. It was, I think Bockwinkel was in the front, and it was Baron, Mad Dog, Steve Olszanowski, myself, Adrian Adonis, and I don't remember who the other one was in there. Might have been Horst Hoffman. And Mad Dog liked to play cribbage, and it's near the end of his career here. So we're flying down, and he never says anything. God, and he kind of just sits and rocks. He's playing cards, and all of a sudden he goes, Greg, and that voice I hear is like this. And he's, what? I am meeting my fiance's family tonight. Would you ask the promoter if I can wrestle early on the card? I said, well, I'll ask him when we get there. So, and prior to that, his son was up in Montreal, got arrested for trying to rob a gas station. So they were either throw him in jail or Mad Dog had to come and get him and bring him back back with him back in Minnesota. So Mad Dog's son, he's got to get back on the small plane, drive to Montreal, pick the kid up and come back. So we get in the locker room and I see Mad Dog talking to Jim, and Jim gives him something. I said, what are you doing? Well, I gave him some speed, and I told him not to take it till tomorrow so he can drive all the way to Montreal and back. I said, God, why would you give him that? Jeez, are you out of your mind? So we're sitting there, we're talking, and Mad Dog comes over, and he's on the second match, and he wanted to thank me. And then I see him back over in the corner. I see him pop a pill with a pint of whiskey. That was his deal. He'd drink a pint of whiskey before he'd go in the ring. Chugs it down. Oh my God. So he goes out and he's not out for maybe 3 minutes and he comes back in. I said, what the hell are you doing back here? I killed that guy. Jesus Christ. So I said, well, you better get ready, take your shower. And he says, I'll get ready to do it. I'll get it ready. And Joe Dusick always had 2 cases of beer in each locker room. So Mad Dog, he gets a towel on, he comes over, he sits down, we're talking, he starts drinking beer. And I said, Mad Dog, I thought you had to get going. You got early, we got you on early. I'll go and I'm gonna go. I'm gonna tell you again. Jesus, he's gonna lose it. So he's drinking a few beers, and finally there's an intermission. We're on last. We go out and wrestle. We were out about 35, 40 minutes, came back in, go to get a beer, they're all gone. So we take our showers, we go and we drive over to the airport. We get there and there's no Mad Dog and no Steve Olszanowski. And the pilot said, well, I don't know where they were. And somebody said, well, Steve went with Mad Dog. He's meeting his family at this restaurant. So Mad Dog, all of a sudden we see a cab pull out and Mad Dog gets out and he's kind of wobbling and he's got barbecue sauce. They're at a rib joint, barbecue sauce on his beard, on his t-shirt. And I said, Steve, what the hell happened? He said, well, he took that speed and then Adrian gave him some kind of a pill. I said, oh, shit. And then he drank, I don't know how many beers he drank. And then he had wine at the restaurant with the family. And then he stopped and drank another pint of whiskey in the car. He was getting out of hand. I had him smoke a joint. I said, oh, God, Steve, you out of your freaking mind? So we get on the plane and we put him in the back and he's sitting next to Adrian. And we're playing cards. And apparently he said to Adrian, I feel like flying tonight. And Adrian said, well, you can just jump out the door. So we're playing cards and all of a sudden, boom, the whole back of the plane moves and we all duck. We thought another plane hit us and took the tail off. And the pilot's yelling at us, who opened the door? Who opened the door? And we look, and lucky, it was the only plane built that had 2 chains holding on to the stairs and to the window opening up. He's hanging out, and all you can see is his back. And he'd turn in and he says, it's so peaceful, I feel like flying tonight. And the pilot says, get him in, get him in. We said, he's going to jump and we're not going with him. Mm-hmm. So we finally get him in, sits down. He says, get your seatbelts on, get in the tuck position, because if this wing catches, we're going to flip over. So we're going, oh my God. And we look down, the runway is foamed. There's fire engines, ambulance, police cars, all the red lights going. Another runway over, 2 Ozark Airlines. They're holding them, and we're landing in, I think, Waterloo, Iowa, or someplace in Iowa. And the pilot comes down, he takes that plane, comes down. We come to a stop, and we all kind of look up at each other. We look back, and the foam's all over Mad Dog. And he's peeling it off of him. And he gets off the plane, and he starts walking across the runways where the other planes are being released. So now the police come running up and they said, is that Mad Dog Bashan? We said, yeah, that's him. Well, go get him because they're releasing the airline. I said, well, shit, he just opened the plane at, 6,000 feet. You guys might want to go get him. No, you go get him So we finally, Steve and I run out there. And as we get there, he turns around and he hits us, both of us, open hand. And I hit him back, and about that time, the jet plane goes by, and it rolled us all over. We rolled right in the dirt, and we said, Steve and I walked back to the plane, and the police came, and they said, hey, you got to get him. I said, yeah, we're done. You go get him. So they run up, and they grab him, and they're trying to get his arms back to handcuff him, and they can't get him back. And Mad Dog's going, I'll kill you all. And the police finally get him handcuffed. They bring him back to the plane. They said he had two options. He can either go back on the plane or we're throwing him in jail. And then he had some other choice words for us. And we said, okay, we'll get him back in the plane. So we got him back behind. There was a wall between the pilot and the back of the first seat. And we put two straps around him. And all the way back, he's like this, rocking in the chair, going, I'm going to kill you guys when I get out of here. I'm going to kill you. So when we finally landed back in Minneapolis, when we opened the door, we all bailed out, and the poor pilot was left alone with Mad Dog and had to untie him. So he'd had all this, he'd had the speed, he'd smoked a joint, he had wine, he had beer, he had a pint of whiskey. And who knows what else, whatever Adrian gave him. We have no idea.
Oh, that's incredible. Yeah, you go from one extreme and then you get another extreme a little bit later on because, you know, Mad Dog was wild and unpredictable. And a couple years down the line, you got the fabulous Freebirds rolling in. What was it like being around the Freebirds?
You know, I was with them down in Georgia couple times, and they were really wild, out of control. They weren't that bad when they were with the AWA. I think Vern had set them all down when they came in and gave them a pretty good lecture. And, you know, they were making good money, so they had their moments, but not as many as they used to. But they were a great combination.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
They really were good guys. That's about all I got.
I'm really hoping that some of our younger listeners are listening to this and they're hearing names like you're talking about Adrian, Adonis, and the Freebirds, and I hope they're Googling those names so they can learn about this. But one thing our younger listeners probably don't know is that Hulkamania was actually born in AWA.
Yes. That's
where Hulk Hogan, that's where he got his start there. Do you have any stories or memories of teaming with Hogan? And at that point in time, did you know that there was something about him that he was going to explode to that next level?
Well, I wrestled it. This is a funny story. I wrestled in New York, and they had me on the second or third match with Johnny Rods. And we went out there for about 14, 15 minutes and tore the place apart. I mean, people were standing. And when I came out, Vince Sr. was there. And he looked at me, he said, what was that? And I said, well, that was wrestling. He said, but how are my guys going to follow it? And I said, well, that's their freaking problem, you know? So Hulk was on the card that night. And mechanically in the ring, he wasn't very good. And we talked a little bit afterwards, and I said, well, why don't you come into the AWA? You need a lot of work. We'll help you out. You got a lot of potential. So I went back home and I told my dad, I said, hey, this guy, Hulk Hogan, we should bring him in here. He said, well, what's he like? I said, well, he's big, and, you know, he's wrestling as a heel there. And I said, he didn't do a very good interview, what I heard. So he needs some help there, and he needs some ring help. He said, okay. And I told Hulk, call my dad. Finally, 3 months later, he finally called him. And he came in, and we were wrestling in Milwaukee, and they put Johnny Valiant with him because Johnny could do a good interview and was his manager. And Milwaukee, we were sold out that night. And I came back, and he said, well, how'd it go? And I said, well, he's a babyface, man. The people love him. He's got that look. He said, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, I'm telling you, they cheered him, you know. He said, well, I said, he's really, you know, he needs a lot of work in the ring. So they did. They put Jim and I with him with 6-man tag team matches so he could get the flow on that. We would, you know, we'd get an arm on him, and we'd tag him out and say, you know, grab the arm, twist it, boom, drop a leg, tag out. And we had him look really good all the time in the match. And then Vern helped him with his interviews, and the Hulkamania thing started there. And we were at the Rosemont Horizon, and we were wrestling Bockwinkel Stevens and Jerry Blackwell with Bobby Heenan and their partner. And it was Hulk and Jim and I. and it was sold out. And we hit the ring, and Hulk did his pose. He had the T-shirt on. And I told Jim to grab the T-shirt. We each grabbed a side, and we tore it off real slow. And those people just went through the ceiling. And by that time, he was really catching on. And, he got guys like Bockwinkel and Stevens and Blackwell, beating him, really. And everybody making him look like the Hulk. And, that's where he really got it all. Vern helped me with his interviews. And then he said, when you're coming back on somebody, just start shaking and show that fire. You got to show some fire. So he taught him that. We taught him, timing in the ring and when to do something, when not to, and how to do it. And then the rest is history. McMahon offered him a deal. We had our battle royals. We ran those usually in October. In the November, the winners would meet the champion. And we were in Phoenix, and it was the last one. And Andre was there, and Andre and Hulk were going to Japan. And when he got on the plane, Vince was there. And when he came back, we had Christmas week, we had all our major cities, 6 of them. They're all sold out. And it was mostly 6-man tag team matches with Jim and I. Hulk had wrestled Bockwinkel. He'd won the St. Paul Battle Royal, wrestled Bockwinkel in November, and didn't win the belt. So then, CBS came to us while Hogan was in Japan. And they said, we would like to do a Saturday night 2-hour special, but we want a match with Bockwinkel and Hogan. And this was prior to Hogan leaving, before we got to December, when everything was sold out. We had to sign, him and I, a non-disclosure that we wouldn't tell anybody about. They wanted to do a big promotion on the thing. They didn't want anybody to know about it. So Hogan goes to Japan. He comes back Christmas Day. We show up, sold out, no Hogan. And I call him at home. I said, hey, what are you doing? Well, I signed a deal with Vince. I'm going to New York. I said, well, Hunk, you don't do business like that. Finish your commitment, and then we don't have any problem letting you go. But you can't just not show up. I mean, we got, St. Paul, we got Winnipeg, Denver, Chicago, Milwaukee, everything's sold out. So he didn't show. And that went all the way through Christmas week. And then the next thing we see him in January, he's in New York. And then Vince targeted the AWA because of the talent we had.
Absolutely.
And the money we were drawing. It was phenomenal what we were doing. And Hulk told me, he said, well, Vince is paying me more not to show up. I said, you don't even know what you're going to make on this. Everything's sold out. He probably would have made, I don't know, 20, 30 grand. And I know Vince wasn't paying him that much. But he had signed the deal. So that was, the rest is history.
Absolutely. One thing that I absolutely loved about the AWA was its stacked history of tag team wrestling. I'm a big tag team wrestling fan, whether it was, yourself and Jim and the High Flyers, you had the Freebirds, you had Bad Company, the Destruction Crew, East-West Connection, we go on and on and on. I'd love to know about some of the matches that you had with the Road Warriors. People say they're one of the greatest tag teams of all time, accolades-wise. But what was it like being in there with the Road Warriors?
It was an experience. They were trained in Minneapolis by Eddie Sharkey, and Eddie had trained a lot of guys, but they never took them a long time to be main event people. And Road Warriors are really, really rough, and they sent them down to Ole Anderson. And Ole, because they weren't very good in the ring at that time, he said, short matches just beat the crap out of people. I mean, that's what they want to see. You're the road warriors, so that's what we're going to do. So that's how they learned, or they thought that was the way to do it. And that's the way they wrestled. So it was tough with them in the ring. We had to wrestle them in a cage match up in Winnipeg. And they're going balls out. And we let them go balls out because they, what we call blow up. They'd run out of gas. And when they got tired, their muscles got tired and they weren't as agile. And I took Big Joe down and I put that Indian death lock on him. And his legs were so big and mine are so thin. But you're breaking my fucking leg. And I said, well, I'm going to if you don't, if you keep hammering on it. And he sat up and I hit him as hard as I could. I slapped him down. He went, oh, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to break your leg before you get up to do it. So, we slowed him down a little bit, but that's kind of what you had to try to do with them. So, you can make a match out of it. Otherwise, they were just hammering and kicking, the people can only watch that for so long, and we were the underdogs. They wanted to see some kind of fight, and we fought the hell out of them. We learned that from King Kong Brody and Stan Hansen in Japan.
Absolutely.
That's my last question, then I'll let you do the last couple, Tyler, and before we take it home. And thank you so much for all your time, Mr. Gagne. But what I want to know, we're seeing more and more second generation, third generation, even we're getting close to fourth generation wrestlers in all the major promotions right now. Legacy names are being pushed. You have your Rhodes, you have your Samoan families, you have your Harts. As a second generation wrestler yourself, can you tell us any pros and cons to being a second generation, a legacy wrestler as it were?
Well, the pros are you've been around the business your whole life.
Mm-hmm.
And, most of the guys who had sons put them through a pretty good grind if you wanted to wrestle. Fritz von Erich with the boys, that was no picnic down there for them. And it wasn't any picnic for us with Vern. In the way he ran the camp, and all the guys, we all grew up and we respect the sport. We respect the people in it. When you go back to, like you're talking to the Road Warriors, I don't think they really had a respect for what was really what wrestling was all about. I think eventually they grew into it, but it took them a long time. Whereas the guys who have been around it their whole life, they come in and they just they feel it and they can adapt to it quicker.
Right.
Some never do. Some of the talent never has, that comes from families. But you look at Tully Blanchard and Joe Blanchard, the Von Erichs, Mike and Eddie Graham.
Yeah.
The list goes on. And the guys that Eddie Graham trained too down there, they were all successful. Eddie trained like Vern did.
Right.
Joe Blanchard trained the same way. Von Erich put his kids through it, because those guys, they knew how hard it was to become a professional wrestler and what you really needed to do when you had to earn that respect. And that's why the camps and the Hart camp was so hard. He made you respect what you were doing, and you better, or you're not going to graduate from it.
Right.
And you're not going to make it in professional wrestling.
There's a famous story from Jake Roberts saying that his dad, Grizzly, didn't smarten him up to the business, put him right in. He wasn't smart enough to kayfabe or anything like that. When did Vern smarten you up to what the business was?
Brunzell and myself, we didn't know till we were walking out of the dressing room.
I love that.
Jim was crapping in his pants. His first match, he's all nervous, and Vern pulled him aside and told him that it's the way it's going to be.
Yeah,
he was relieved. We all were.
Yeah.
That's the way he did it with everybody.
That was definitely old school, right? Yeah.
That was old school. when you put those holds on, put them on.
Yeah.
You know, cinch them up.
Well, Mr. Gagne, I have a few more questions I just love to
Uh-oh.
ask you here. I can't let you off the hook without talking about somebody that I know that I've heard you speak about with a tremendous amount of respect, and I think you've gone on record to say that he's the only person that actually gave proper notice when he left the AWA, and that's the legendary Bobby the Brain Heenan.
Yep.
Can you take us back to some of those amazing, fun matches that you guys had, the Weasel Suit matches, and just what it was like working with Bobby?
Well, it was one day, Wally Carbo, you know, it was with Heenan, and he was so hot. And Wally says, Jesus Christ, what are we going to? I said, well, everybody calls him a weasel. Get a weasel suit match. He says, what's a weasel suit match? I said, I don't know. You know what a weasel animal is. Have somebody make that and we'll try to stuff them in it. But Bobby was one of the greatest performers of all time, in and out of the ring. He knew how to really turn on the people, you know, and he was hated. He was that little coward that, you know, everybody in the stands, we can knock the crap out of that guy, you know, and they all wanted to. He made them feel like he was the boss and they were the people, their boss. Now that when you knocked out Bobby, you were knocking out the boss. Mm-hmm. And people just lived like that. And on the mic, there was nobody with a quicker than Bobby Heenan. I remember one night, one interview he did, I was wrestling Nick for the championship. And I was down in Florida. And Bobby says, yeah, you know, I was down in Florida doing some scouting and I see Greg Gagne down on the beach. And if you think he's going to beat Bockwinkel, it won't happen. He said he wasn't moving much because he's so skinny, his legs were stuck in the sand. You know, he would take the little idiosyncrasies or the weak parts of your body or whatever what's up you said, and he would just turn it into a masterpiece.
Yeah, Bobby was incredible. He's one of my personal favorites of all time. I just got a couple quick things I'd love to ask you about. I'd love to ask you about I guess it's now an infamous match in the history of it was kind of when you guys were working with Memphis. Jerry Lawler and Kerry Von Erich at Super Clash there. And Kerry infamously had the razor and got his arm before the match started. Were you around when that happened? And
no.
So I guess the story is that before he went to the ring, he forgot that he was going to gig or something, and he scratched his arm and cut his whole arm up right before he went out on the pay-per-view.
I don't remember that one.
No, that was the big finish where he had the claw on him and he was bleeding, and then I think they gave the belt to Lawler that night at the Super Clash pay-per-view.
He you know, that's when he had lost the foot.
Yeah.
And that was pretty amazing, just watching him maneuver like that. It was too bad because he was such a talent, you know, but he had his issues, unfortunately. But he would have been a phenomenal champion for the NWA.
Absolutely. Did you happen to see the movie?
I can't say anything bad about the Von Erichs. I mean, those kids busted their butts and they owned Texas.
Yes.
You know, when you bring up their name.
Magic. And
they deserve it. Mm-hmm. You know, and Fritz brought up the boys. He worked them hard. He was hard on them.
I thought the movie was beautiful too. I don't know if you've seen that or not yet.
I saw it. Yeah,
I thought they did a great job.
It's really depressing, though.
It is. It's a hard story, but I really like that they focus so much on the brotherly love. I thought that was a nice twist because we always it always is hard to hear the Von Erich story for sure, but I thought that was nice that they focused on the love of the family.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I talked to Holly Von Erich, and she didn't feel it was the right thing to do. She said it just depicted the too much. It was, I know what you're saying. I mean, it was depressing coming out of there. And she said, we should have been a little more, they could have done a little more uplifting on everybody.
Yeah.
But you know, I don't know how it did at the box office. I think in some places it did really well. But I mean, I had a friend of mine that I used to play golf with, he came up to me and he said, "Have you seen the Von Erich movie?" I said, "No, I haven't. I'm going to, though." He says, "It's the most depressing thing I've ever seen."
Oh, Jesus.
You know, so it wasn't a feel-good movie that you come out of.
No.
So but that's what happened in that family, just so tragic.
Absolutely, it was.
I just love that 50 years later, we still talk. When you talk about Texas, you talk about Texas in a great light in professional wrestling, and you still talk about the Von Erichs.
Well, yeah.
Yes, your Steve Austins and your Undertakers and your Booker T's have come from there. A lot of Texas, there's a lot of royalty coming out of Texas, but the Von Erichs, you always round back to the Von Erichs. Doesn't matter if you're a 50-year-old wrestling fan or a 15-year-old wrestling fan. You know that when you talk about Texas, you talk about the Von Erichs. You can't take that away from them, and I love that.
No, you never can.
One of the most famous matches in the AWA history is an incredible tag team match between the Midnight Rockers and Doug Summers and Buddy Rose. I believe it's at the Showboat there in Vegas.
Yep.
What do you remember about that match? Because that was a war those guys went through.
They're lucky they even had it.
Really?
If you want the background story to it.
Yes.
They were great. Sean and Marty were young in the business.
Mm-hmm.
And Doug Summers and Rose have been around a long time. And the Showboat, we did our ESPN show out of there. Mm-hmm. The people treated us phenomenal. There was a lady that ran it for us. And she was one of the owners. And they got a cage match. Is that the one you're talking about, the cage match?
I think this was the disqualification, the real bloody one on ESPN.
Okay.
But the cage match was awesome too.
Well, that's the one that I was thinking of. I mean, both of them were great matches. But we get to the arena, and all of a sudden, Janetti and Michaels come up and said, "We're not going on until we get paid." I said, "What do you mean you're not going on until you get paid?" "We're not going on." I said, "Well, then don't go on." And then Buddy Rose and Summers had put them up to it. And they had gone to the lady and told her that they weren't going to wrestle that night if they didn't get paid up front, and here's what they wanted.
Wow.
So I couldn't get over to the other locker room where Rose and the other guy were. Probably knocked the crap out of both of them. Almost did afterwards. So I just kept saying, "Okay, no problem. I got 4 other guys here. We'll go in there and we'll make up for it." Mm-hmm. Well, finally they came and said, "Okay, we're going to go in." Little did I know that the lady had paid them.
Oh no!
I didn't find out until maybe a month later.
Jeez.
And that was pretty rotten. I mean, they were good in the ring. Sean and Marty were just a handful when they were here. Oh my God, they were in trouble all the time. Mm-hmm. Sean now is, he grew out of it. Janetti never did. No. And Sean just does a fantastic job for the WWE, running that NXT. And he always had a tremendous feel. They both did, but Sean was. He was a step above the other 3. Rose was good. Doug Summers was good. Probably if we were in our prime, they had never been main eventers with the people we had around. But they were really good, solid, and they'd always have a good match on the card. You could always count on that from them.
Absolutely. So, Mr. Gagne.
So that's the story.
Well, before I ask you my last question, I always like to end the show the same way, but I would be remiss if I did not ask you about the Wrestle Rock Rumble and if we can expect maybe a new album coming out from you in the future.
Well, that was a company that we hired to do the publicity for us. They came up with that idea.
Love it.
Yeah, and then they picked certain people, and I didn't know. I thought, I can't sing and do a thing. Well, you're just going to do this, do that, But it was something that this company thought would be the right thing to do. It got some attention. People still talk about it.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
You know, it was either good or bad. They're talking. That's all that counts. That's what Vern used to say to us. Whether it's good or bad, if they're talking about you, that's good.
That's it, right?
That's it.
Yeah.
Well, the last question I always like to end every interview with is when you take a look back at everything that you've done in your entire career, what are some moments for you that just make you smile or make you happy to think about? Just something really personal for you.
I always go back to one match that I had. I mean, to get Vern to give you a compliment was one in a million.
Mm.
And him and I were wrestling Bockwinkel and Saito in St. Paul. And Vern was near the end of his career. And in fact, he may have even come out of retirement for that match. I don't remember, but I think he might have. And so I had to work most of the match. And we had the people really going. And when the match was over, when we got back in the locker room, he said, "You're better than I ever was."
Wow.
That's pretty.
So that I remember.
That's a beautiful story.
Yeah.
Yep.
I don't think I can think of a better way to take it home from there, Mr. Gagne. This was incredible. That was really touching. Actually, that moved me a lot.
Yeah, I was a little emotional.
Yeah.
A little emotional.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Before we let you go, is there anything that you'd like to plug where people can get a hold of you, the action figure line, the
Well,
podcast?
I would tell everybody go to Power Town and check out the action figures and some of the other merchandise coming up. We've got some great stuff coming up. And like I said, we got 255 people on board, and we're going to make sure that they all, get a chance to make something out of the merchandising. They never had that opportunity back when we were wrestling. It was just starting when we were on our way out. But that's good. If they want to find me, they can find me on Instagram. Gagne. Greg, I think it is, or
Yeah, I think
Greg.
it's. I'll tell you.
When you're
right
my
now.
age, I don't know. I have to have people help me get on it all the time.
It is Gagne.Greg.
Yeah.
You got it.
But anyhow, I try to put some old stuff. My mother had made these big, huge albums of Vern, and we got 8 of them, pages and pages. So I've been putting clippings of that on and throwing some stuff. Some other newer stuff in there too, but it seems to be people seem to like it. So I hope they go see that. But again, Power Town Wrestling, don't forget about it. It's going to be, we're going to make some noise.
I think you already are making noise.
Hey, I want to thank you guys for the great interview and the nice job you did. I really appreciate it.